Hi guys, and welcome to the second in the series for the January 2024 database exam. In this video, we're going to be looking at the queries and reports side of the actual exam, which is going to cover activities 3 and 3A. So in this question, we're asked to create a query to display an alphabetically sorted list of roses that are any shade of pink and that they have a specific height or a height type of 1.8 meters. We're asked to make sure that we display only the rose name, the rose colour, and the supplier name. Now this is very important. We must make sure that we really focus on what we must output and display inside of our queries. We might find that we need more fields inside of our queries, but we're not actually going to display those results in the final outcome. So in order to create our queries, we're obviously going to need to jump into our database. So we can see that we've got our 4 tables here, and just to make sure that we've got our relationships, we're going to click on the relationships option under the database tools, and we can see, yes, that we've got all of our established relationships in place. So in order to create a query, we're going to need to go onto the ribbon where we go to the create option. Now this time we're going to shift over our view to the queries area here. Now Access is quite good. It provides you with a query wizard and a query design. I prefer to go into the query design area so that we can really have a little bit more control over what we want and what fields we might need and what tables we might have. So I jump into query design by clicking on that, and you'll notice that we're put into a view where we have a grey area, some property sheets on the right hand side, and then add tables. Now depending on the Access version you're using, you may find that this add tables element is not there. So you may need to actually show that. And you can do that by going up to the ribbon at the top and just looking at the add tables option by selecting it, ticking it on and off, and you'll see it appears. So in this instance, we're going to need to select a couple of tables, actually 3, because we want to see the rose name, the rose color, and the supplier, because this is going to provide us with information as to who provides the rose that is of a specific color of pink or like pink, and that it's within a certain height range that we want. So we're going to drag or click on the add tables options here, and we're going to add the rose type table, we're going to add the rose table, and we're going to add the supplier table. As you can see, we can see the relationships between these tables in this little query window here. Now if we go down to the bottom, here is where we can start to customize what fields we're going to have inside of our query. You can use the drop down option here, or what you can do is you can actually double click on the actual field area here inside of the table, and actually it will pop up down the bottom, and I'll show you that now. So the first one we need to have is actually the rose name. So you can double click here and you can see it appears down the bottom. Or what we can do, as I say, is just do the drop down, and then you should find, if I do it on the one next to it, you should find that you've got access to all of the fields across all of the tables. So now we need to have the rose color, and we're going to take that from the table rows as well. So here we can see table rows, go down, oh, there we got rose underscore color, and select that. We need to see the information around the supplier name. Who's going to provide that rose? So we're going to choose the supplier name, and I'm going to just double click up here in the supplier table. And then finally, we need to know the height, the specific height of that rose. And that's going to come out of the rose type table. So I'm just going to click on that here. Now, if we refer back to the question, it says it must only display the rose name, which is this one here, the rose color, and the supplier. Notice we've got this option for show here. What we can do is we can deselect whatever we want to not show, but we want to keep it in as part of the criteria of this query, which is going to be the rose height. We don't want to display that. We've not been asked to display that. However, it is one of the conditions that we must take into consideration. So the next bit we're going to be looking at is that we've been asked to show any rose that has any shade of pink in it. So what we're going to do is go down to the criteria row here. And under the rose color, we're going to enter some parameters that the query will look against, so that when it gives us the output, it's conforming to those query parameters. So we said that it's going to be anything that's of a shade of pink. Now we've got light pink, dark pink, we've got pale pinks, and all of those sorts of combinations. So where we can use the keyword of like. So like is a keyword within access that says anything that's like, and then what we're going to put is the parameter of pink between speech marks. So we're going to do PINK, and then we're going to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to test that this works at this point in time by clicking on the run option up here. Now we can see that we've got pink China doll, and it's coming from Witherington's. Now we know that there are more than that inside of our tables. If we open up our rows table, we can see we've got pale pink, coral pink, light pink, and we've got all the sorts of names here. So what we want to do is we want to see more than just pale pink or pink China doll. So I'm going to go back into my query design, and I'm going to look at what we've got down here and make sure that it is spelt properly and it is in the right parameter. And what I'm going to need to do is put in special symbols at the beginning of pink and at the end of pink, which is the star sign. So now that means that anything could be pink, something pink, or pink something. So now if I run that, we'll see what happens. We've got the list of coral pink, pale pink, pink, light pink, and bright pink. So we've got more of a result here just by putting those stars either side of our criteria inside of our query. However, if I add or make it so that you can see the height of these, because obviously I turned it off earlier on in the actual query design, we can see that we've got a variety of different heights that are outside of that tolerance that's been asked for, but you need to see any rows type that's of a height of at least 1.8 meters. Well, we've got 1.8, 1.8, 1.82, 1 which is below that, and 0.6. So obviously we need to add some criteria to this. So go back to your design view. We're going to go back down to where our criteria is, but this time we're going to go under rows height, and we're going to do greater than using the arrow up and equal to, and then we're going to put in our value of 1.8. That means that it's including the value of 1.8 and anything above. So just for the purpose of making sure that this query is outputting what we're going to do, we're going to run it without making sure that we've unclicked the criteria to show that for height, because we don't need that in our final outcome. And we should see, yes, we have 3 results here. We've got 1, 2, 3, and they're all above the 1.8 value. Now, as I said, we need to make sure that we're only displaying the row's name, the row's color, and the supply name. So we're just going to go back to the design view. We're going to unselect the show option, and then we're going to run it just to make sure everything is what it should be. And we can see, yes, we've got the 3 results that we need for that query to be effective for the first part of our queries, query A. Now we're going to save it. I'm going to right click on save, and then we're going to use the naming convention of QRY, which means query. I'm going to do underscore, and then I'm going to do A. You can obviously name it whatever you need to name it as per the requirements in the exam paper. I'm just going to go back into the design of this query because I've noticed that I haven't alphabetically sorted the row's name as one of the requirements in the actual exam itself. So I'm just going to click on the option for sort, and then I'm going to choose ascending. And then I'm going to run it just to make sure it's all in the ascending order. And I have noticed that I have actually got one more entry than maybe I was expecting based on the data sets that we've got. I'm just going to go back to the rows table and have a look. And I can see that I've accidentally typed in bright pink for Arthur Bell Rose here. However, I'm just going to change this to be bright yellow as per the data set. I'm just going to close this. I'm going to go back into my query A, just going to run it again just to make sure I've got the right output. And we can see, yep, I have got the 2 entries I need. And I am also going to make sure that I need to hide the height inside of the query so that then I know that I've achieved everything I need to have inside of the query A. And now I'm going to move on to the creation of the second of our queries. Normally you'll find that the first query is the easiest of the queries and the second query is the more challenging query, where you are going to be creating additional field entries inside of the output of a query that aren't necessarily inside of your database tables that you've got. So in order for us to create that second query, we're going to go up to create, we're going to go to query design, and we're going to get ourselves in a ready position to move on to the next query. So as we mentioned, the second query is normally the harder of the two. And in this one, we're going to be looking at grabbing two fields from the tables and then creating two additional fields that are not inside of the actual database tables that we created. So first of all, what we need to do is make sure that we've selected the correct tables that we need to use inside of this query. This is going to be the expert table and the rows table. The first field that we're going to need to get is the expert ID from the expert table, the expert surname, and that's it in terms of the fields that we need from the actual database tables themselves. The rest of the fields that we're going to use now are going to be ones that we've created manually. These will actually link to some of the fields inside of the actual tables themselves to get the data. The rest of the output is actually generated from any of the calculations that we're going to create inside of our query. So let's go and see what the output of this query is at the moment. And we can see we've got the expert ID and surname, and we can see that we've got duplicated fields here. Now this is going to be something that we're going to address later on, but we're going to move on to the first of our two field areas that we're going to create ourselves. And we're going to put in here that we need to see the number of years since the last training for the expert. What we do is type this in and then follow it with a colon. What this is going to do is it's going to show the number of years since last training as a heading inside of the query when we run it. The next step is that we need to make sure that we define what the output of this field is going to be. So it's going to be of an integer type. So we put in int. Then we start to put our parentheses in. So we have an open bracket to contain the whole of our command, and then we're going to have another open bracket for date, and then we do an open and close bracket at the end of that. So that is going to get the system time from your computer. Then we want to subtract that value away from the field that has the information around the date of the last training for the expert. Now, in order for us to get that value, we need to put in a square bracket, and then we must type in expert underscore last training, and then close that bracket. What that's going to do is it's going to get the value out of that field, and then it's going to take that value, subtract it from the system time, and then it's going to turn into an integer, the output of that. But we do need to put in one last closing parentheses, and then a division or a divide sign of 365, and then close the full statement with a final closing parentheses. What this is going to do when we run the query is it's going to take the value and show us the whole years that instance is going to be. Now we can see that there is still duplication within the surname expert, but we can see that we have full years as a number of years displayed as a column heading. So we're going to jump back into the design view, and we're going to add an extra condition as we are asked inside of our query. We have been asked only to show those who have training of over 3 years to only be displayed. So in order for us to be able to achieve this, what we need to do is move down to the criteria area. And in the criteria area, we're going to put in the condition that we want. So we're going to be placing a greater than symbol and equal to 3. And this should be able to allow us to only see those records of people where they have had training that's older than 3 years. We're now going to move on to the fourth field of our query. In this field, we're going to need to show the number of the roses that that expert is accountable for. Now, as we did in the previous field, we're going to put in our heading. So we're going to put in the number of roses responsible for, and then follow that with a colon, so that we can then put in our calculation. So after the colon, we're going to target the rows underscore ID. This is going to essentially look for the rows IDs, and then we're going to use a new element called totals, which can be found inside of the ribbon to calculate that for us. But first of all, we're just going to run this query just to see what the output is when we click on the run. And we can see there that there are some numbers that says equal 2, 6 and frost 7, but these aren't complete totals. So what we need to do is click on the totals option inside of our ribbon, and you'll see that this adds an additional row to our query area down the bottom. Notice if we scroll along or move our mouse cursor along, it says total and it's grouped by. We need to choose the drop down for count in this instance. Once we've selected count, we're going to run the query itself just to see what happens inside of our data that's output. What this has done is it's counted up the number of entries that the person or the surname has inside the results. So we can see that there are 2 roses that Aiko is responsible for and 1 rose that Frost is responsible for. What we can do is we can go and check this against our data set that we've typed into our database. Just going to save this and make sure that we use our naming convention of QRY, and I'm going to be _B for this query, and then click on OK, and that should be the second of our 2 queries that we have to created successfully. So we're now going to move on to the next part of the exam, where we're going to be asked to create a report. Each rose type should have a minimum of 2 suppliers. We're asked to create a report that shows a list of the rose type of Grandiflora and the roses type Polyantha. For each rose type, we need to calculate the total number of suppliers and whether more suppliers are needed. The most important part of this section here is telling us what we have to display inside of our report. It's very similar to the elements required inside of the query, in that we're asked to display certain things. So to me, this tells us that there might be some content that we don't have in the side of our database that we've got to generate using some of the built-in functions and features of Access. But also we might need to create our own fields that are deriving information and data inside of the database and presenting them in a different way. So the displays that we must have are a suitable report title, the rose type, the supplier name, the total number of suppliers for each type of rose, and the words "more suppliers needed" if the suppliers are needed. The report must fit on 1 page, and we must evidence this by using the given activity RTF template. So first of all, we're going to need to create a query for this database in order for us to be able to create the report that we need. So as we did before in our previous question for part 3, we're going to go up to the create option, and we're going to go down to the option for query design. And in this instance, we want to select 3 tables from our database. So go to the add tables area, and you'll find that when I use the supplier table, we're going to use the rose type table, and we're going to use the rose table. Once we've got inside of these tables, we're going to choose the fields across a few of them. The first field that we're going to need to have is the rose type. So click on that. And in the rose type area, we're going to need to choose some criteria, as was outlined in the actual exam brief. We're going to need to type in speech marks, the first of our rose types, which is Grandiflora. It also says Grandiflora or Polyantha. So we're going to use the keyword there of or, and then we're going to do another set of speech marks, and we're going to do Polyantha. Then we're going to need to put in the supplier name, and then finally the rose type ID. Then we're going to right click and save this, and we're going to save this within the same naming conventions as we've done before. So QRY _, and then we're going to call it something like rose supplier. Click OK. I'm just going to run the query just to make sure that we've got a good output. So I click on run, and we can see that we've got 3 entries here. That looks about right. So I'm just going to close the query down for now, and then I'm going to go on to our create option, and now we're going to start to create our report. I prefer to use the report wizard in this instance because we can capture all of the information and organize it in a way that is easy and fast and very efficient for us. So upon opening up the report wizard, we're given the wizard area here. We're going to choose whichever query we've just created. So that's going to be our rose supplier. Notice we get given the fields that we want to select. We want to choose all of them. We can do them individually by using the single arrow or the double arrow just to pull them all over. We're going to click on next. We're going to leave it in this way around. So we're going to have the rose type and the rose type ID as our header. And then underneath, we're going to display the supplier of the rose. We're going to click next. We're going to click next again. going to click next one more time. And then we're going to make sure that everything here is portrait. It needs a stepped layout. And we're going to adjust the field width so that the fields fit on a page. This is going to be vital for us later on when we come to customizing and creating the output for our report, because in question D of part 3, we're asked to export the actual report as a PDF, and it needs to fit on one page. So we will come back to that later on. Finally, I'm going to click next, and then I'm going to click on the option to modify the report's design, and then I'm going to go up to the naming area here, and it says, what title do you want for your report? So I'm just going to save this as RPT underscore rows supplier, and then click finish. Notice it puts it as RPT row supplier, and also our report header has RPT underscore row supplier. You need to make sure that you change this and customize it to something of meaning, because you can lose marks. So you could put something like report to show row suppliers or supplier. Then we're going to move on to the design area here. Notice we have a page header that's going to have everything customized as we did in the report. And then we're going to have the detail, so we can list the suppliers underneath. So if I click on report view, you should be able to see that yes, we have our report. We can see that we've got the rows type of grandiflora, and then we can see that there are 2 entries underneath that one. And then polyantha, we can see that there's 1 entry. Now we want to have some more information in this because we need to show the total number of suppliers that has that type of rows and whether there is more suppliers needed. So I'm going to go back into the design of this, and we're going to need to go into this area here. Now we have our page header, a rows type header, details, page footer, but we don't have the rows header but we don't have the rows type footer. In order for us to show this, to add some information in, we need to go up to the group and sort option for us. So once you do that, you'll see that you get this little dialog box down the bottom here, and it says on rows type ID for smallest or largest, and then there's this more option. Expand this and you'll see you get a lot of options, a lot more options that deal with what you can see inside of here where it's been grouped. We've got no totals. With the title, click add, and notice it says without a footer section. We need to change this to with a footer section, and then you can see it appears over here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add some new controls into this report so that it outputs all of the information that we need, because we want to show a total of the suppliers and we want to say whether there's more roses or more suppliers needed. So in order for us to do that, we go up to the controls option here. If you don't see this, it's under the reports design, and you're going to choose the text box option. Now if you click on that and then drag it out here, what you get is you get a text box and a label. A label, obviously we will change that later on to be something of meaning, but the text box says unbound. We can put some criteria in here that will do what we need it to do, and to output the number of rows types that there are inside of, or the number of suppliers that are inside of this one. So in order to do that, we're going to put equals. This is very similar to like an Excel spreadsheet where you put equals. So this cell is going to equal. It's the same thing here. This text box is going to equal something. What you need to do is you need to put equals, and then we're going to use the option for count. And then we're going to put some parentheses, and then we're going to put, what are we going to count? We need to target a field. So we're going to target the rows underscore type.
Okay.
And what this is going to do is it's going to target and it's going to count up how many appear in that instance or that iteration of the output for this section. So I'm just going to close the parentheses and make sure that my square bracket's closed. And I'm just going to run it very quickly just to see if it's working. So go to report view, and hopefully we can see, yes, there are 2 suppliers, because we've got 2 there, and we've got 1 supplier there. But obviously this isn't formatted in a nice way, so we're going to go back into the design view, and we're going to choose to make this a little bit smaller. and we're going to drag it over. If you click on the big square handle, it moves just that text box. And then I'm going to get the label and expand the label. And I'm going to put in some text of meaning. So I'm going to put in here something like total suppliers for the rows type. And then that one should be aligned again. So I'm just going to click on the big handle, move that over, and that should fit quite nicely. We're going to do the same again. We're going to add another text box in. And this time, this is going to tell us whether we need to have more suppliers. So inside of the area for unbound, we're going to go equals. And this is where we're going to put in a statement called an if statement. So if parentheses count, another set of parentheses, square. So we're going to count supplier name. Then we're going to do the square bracket close and close the parentheses. And then we're going to set a condition. So if it's less than 2, then, so the comma kind of denotes a change in the statement to a then, we're going to put a speech mark and we're going to put our message that's going to go out. So more suppliers needed. Close that. Then we have another element where it's else. And then we're going to put in a comma and then we're going to do 2 speech marks. So we're not actually going to put any value into that one. And then we're going to close the bracket. So I've just noticed a spelling mistake there. So I'm just going to change that to more rather than morse. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to give a blank label. And then we're going to view it. Let's see what happens. So click on the view, report view, and we can see there that if it was greater than 2, which it is, it's blank. But if it's less than 2, we can see that we need more suppliers there. So that is our report in a operational state, but we might want to make sure that everything is labeled properly. So I'm going to go back into the design view, and we're going to make sure that our labels don't have underscores in them. So they are appropriate for a user to read. And we could even put supplier name down underneath the header. But I'm quite happy with where it is at the moment. So again, we're just going to go back to make sure that all of the underscores there, like for labels, are removed. We'll view the report and we'll notice I have this issue that popped up. This issue happens because I've deleted something that I shouldn't have deleted. If I click cancel, it's going to show me that yes, under the detail area, I did indeed remove the underscore for the actual label, for the actual text box rather than the label. So if I now go to view, and and I can see that I've done another one for rows type, whereas that should be rows underscore type. And now if I go to view, everything works as it should do. I've noticed I've got some underlines. I've noticed I've got some underscores under the rows type ID, so I'm just going to go back and take that out. And actually, I don't necessarily need that inside of this report. So I could delete it altogether. So select it, press delete, select it, press delete. And now if we run it, it should look quite nice. So we've got the rows type there, we've got the suppliers there, and then we've got the total suppliers for this rows type, and whether there's a message to say whether we need more suppliers or not. So the next step will be to make sure that this is saved. So I'm going to right click and save. And then in our question D for activity 3, we're asked to make sure that our output is of a PDF and that it fits on one page. We can do this in a number of different ways. The first way we can do it is actually doing external data, PDF or XPS, and then choosing the location where you'd like to save it. So I'm just going to move it to the folder that I'm doing this video in. And then click on Publish. We don't want to save the steps that we took. Click on Close. And what we should have is a report, if I drag that into this window here, that fits on one page and is in a PDF format. And then we can save this with a file name appropriate to our exam. The alternative way to do it is by closing the report itself. You can right click on the objects area here. Again, export PDF or XPS, and it's very similar to how that button was with the process. I'm just going to click cancel because I've already got one. That concludes the requirements for activity 3 and should provide you with the full marks for this section.